All right, time now for us to bring in Mr. Gavaskar into the show. Mr. Gavaskar, good evening, sir. Thanks so much for joining us. First up, a tense draw at the SCG. In many ways, this situation was quite similar to the one that we got to see in the Adelaide Test as well. Your thoughts on this match and how India managed to salvage a tough draw?
I think the batting showed character. They almost got to 500 in the first innings despite having been on the field on 2 hot days and fielding for 572 runs. The way they came and scored the runs, so that was absolutely fantastic. And then today, on the final day, when the situation looked grim after the fall of Kohli and Raina's wicket, the way the batsman stood up and salvaged the game, I think it showed character. And then the way the batting has stood up and been counted.
Right, we'll of course talk about the batting in much greater detail in just a bit, but overall, Mr. Gavaskar, what is the biggest lesson that India, you think, would have learned from this particular series? Perhaps not losing the key moments, perhaps not letting the momentum go, especially when they're on top, and not letting the opposition off the hook?
Well, I think if they had the bowling, then it would have been a completely different story. But they just didn't have the bowling, and even granted that the pitches were very good for batting, it just wasn't penetrative enough. It didn't look as if they were ever going to take 20 wickets. In fact, if you have a look at the entire scenario of the 4 test matches, if I recall correctly, not once did the Indian team dismiss the entire Australian team in any of the innings in 4 test matches. That actually tells you a story in itself, doesn't it? So I think the lesson to be learned really is that, you know, we need to come on a tour a little bit earlier, to play some matches to get used to it. Ensure that the tour schedule is such that in between test matches also there is a game or maybe even a couple of games, so that the out of form players can try and get their form back. The fringe players, the guys who otherwise know that they have just come on a holiday, on a tour, they get an opportunity to show how good they are and to put pressure on the established guys. I think that's the way the program should be planned in the future.
All right, Mr. Gavaskar, let's now talk about the Indian batting. And before we get into specifics, your take on the Indian batting overall. Now, this particular team didn't have the likes of Sachin, Sehwag, Dravid, Lakshman, the players that we had on the last tour, when India managed to cross the 300-figure mark in just 1 innings. This time, they have crossed that mark in as many as 5 of the 8 innings that they've played.
I think this is going to be a truly formidable unit in the future, and people will go miles to see this unit, because this batting unit has got everything. It's got copybook cricket, it's got some extraordinary shot making ability, and it is a team which is a very athletic unit. They run very well between the wickets. They'll give a lot of pleasure to a lot of people over the next few years if they maintain their form, and more importantly, if they maintain their fitness and enthusiasm.
All right, now getting into the specifics of the Indian batting, let's talk about Virat Kohli. Now, when we talk about Kohli, there are really 2 facets to this man. First his batting, and now, of course, his test captaincy. How do you rate Kohli on both those scales?
Well, as far as the batting was concerned, I mean, he was extraordinary. To score almost 700 runs in a 4 test series is never easy. He had 400s to boot. And every single time he came out to bat, it looked as if he was going to get 100. It was you know, such a comforting thought to see him come out to bat, because the way he walked out to bat, the confidence that he showed from the first ball, it really was a sight to see. As far as the captaincy is concerned, what he showed in the Sydney Test is that he had learned from the Adelaide Test. In the Adelaide Test, they went for a win when it would have been more practical after the loss of Wriddhiman Saha's wicket, to try and play it sensibly, keep a victory in sight, but at the same time a victory was not possible, to try and save the game as they did here at Sydney. And that's the thing. He had learned from that Adelaide mistake, if I might call it a mistake, and then played for a draw over here, which nothing's wrong. We're talking about a country's test record, and losing a test does nothing to a country. A lot of romantics might say, oh, they went down fighting, but they went down, and they went down in the first test. So if the same application had been shown that they showed in Sydney, in Adelaide, you would have come to Sydney with 1-0 down, right, and with a chance to level the series.
Right, of course, the Indian batting was the biggest highlight in this particular series, but let's talk about a couple of batsmen who didn't really deliver with the bat. First up, Cheteshwar Pujara. He is, of course, someone who's in the test mold, but whenever someone new has to be brought into the team, it's perhaps Pujara who has to make way. How do you see his future in the test team?
Well, he can't be discarded because he's shown at the test level that he can score runs. He's got big hundreds in South Africa. He's batted well in New Zealand to a certain extent. So I would imagine that he's got to be kept in the frame. The fact that he has been left out because over here he just seemed to get a little too subdued, just get a little too bogged down, I think was probably the right way to go, because in the final test you were looking for a win. And when you're looking for a win, you want in the middle order, at the top of the order, somebody who's got a good defense and somebody who can play the shots. And so I think Rohit Sharma's inclusion was a well thought out inclusion.
Right, what about Suresh Raina, Mr. Gavaskar? Here's someone who's making a comeback after 2 years, gets ducks in both the innings. What's his test future looking like according to you?
Well, yes, he's only 28, so you can't really write him off. But somebody who's had as bad a test as he has had, and somebody who hasn't really had the opportunities overseas to show how good he is, then I think with the kind of competition that is there, he really will have to score double hundreds at the domestic level to come back into the frame. I don't think we should judge him from the number of runs he scores in one-day cricket, because that's a completely different game. The white ball and the red ball game is completely different. To judge players by how they play in limited overs cricket and include them in test cricket is not the way to go. I think Raina will have to go back to domestic cricket, score double hundreds and maybe more for him to come into the selection committee's minds again.
Right. What about Wriddhiman Saha, Mr. Gavaskar? Many experts feel he is the best wicket keeper that we have in the country, but he has still got a long way to go with the bat, especially in foreign conditions. Is he your first pick as a wicket keeper now that Dhoni is no longer part of the test team?
Yes, because as a wicket keeper, you're absolutely right. He's got the best hands in the business. As a batsman, he can only get better, because this was a difficult pitch to bat on. Even at Adelaide, when he played, it wasn't the easiest of pitches to bat on. And even in the first innings of the Sydney Test, he showed tremendous resistance, tremendous ability. So I think we've got to have faith in him. We've got to have patience with him.
All right, now one thing that really let India down on this tour, of course, is the bowling, and we've had multiple discussions about that. But realistically, Mr. Gavaskar, how do you turn things around as far as Indian bowling is concerned? The bowlers we have in the squad right now are really the best in the country as far as recognized talent is concerned.
Well, if you see the way the new batting came good, when the last trip was there, you had Rahul Dravid, you had Virendra Sehwag, you had Tendulkar, you had Lakshman, and they still weren't able to do much on that particular trip. Now on this trip, you had new batsmen apart from Kohli. Everybody else was playing in Australia for the first time. You showed faith in a new lot. I think you've got to show faith and patience in a new lot of bowlers as well, because this was the second time 3 out of the 4 bowlers were in Australia, and for the second time they were taken to the cleaners as they were in 2011-12. So you really can't keep going with them, despite the fact that they might pick bags or wickets in a domestic series, because overseas they have over the last 3 years done nothing for India's cause. So I think like we have done with the batting, we really need to look at a fresh set of bowlers, and you will find them in domestic cricket.
Right, look for a fresh set of bowlers. That really is a very important statement coming from you, Mr. Gavaskar. One final question before we let you go. How important is a series scoreline for you? We've, of course, had so much talk about the series scoreline through the series. We've cut it down from 4-0 to 2-0 this time. How important is it for you?
Well, the scoreline at the end of the day is what everybody looks at 20 years down the road when they look at the Australia-India series in Australia 2014-15. The scoreline 2-0 will be seen. But if the players have learned something from this trip and then go on to win over the next 12 months, help India to win not just in test cricket but in limited overs cricket with the experience that they've got, then you will have to say that the experience was worth it. Sometimes losing can actually teach you a lot, and I think that is what is expected of this team. That is what Indian cricket hopes, that this team will have learned so much from this tour. And it's a hard tour. A tour of Australia is a very, very hard tour. then Indian cricket will only benefit.